chairs. I don't know how they're, I think they have chairs. I want to make sure you're not like floating or squatting. You have chairs back there, right? Okay, just checking. There is a chair here. Whoa. Okay, I didn't see him disappear. That threw me off. Anyway, okay. So today we're going to go over Metasploit and Nmap. There's a lot of new faces here, so I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Michael. There's a chair right here, and there's a chair. Okay, cool. They're figuring it out. My name is Michael. I'm president of the club, and if you have any questions as far as GMU goes about the club, Mason, Circuit, and student government, I hold a position in those three. So if you have any questions, hit me up. Tyler's in the other room doing malware, so if you think you're at that talk, you're not. We're doing Metasploit and Nmap today. On a general scale, what Metasploit and Nmap will do for you is it's kind of like systems exploitation. What I mean by that is a lot of CTFs go over topics like forensics, reverse engineering, all that, but in cybersecurity competitions, like that's what CTFs are. It's your literally first meeting. A lot of cybersecurity competitions that are attack defend do is they just give you a box, they attack the other box, and keep your box safe. This is good for those kinds of environments. Maybe not these tools, but these principles are probably pretty good in the event you're in IT 353, because that's literally a wargaming class. You're never going to hear me talk about that class because I'm actively in that class and I'm not trying to get honor coded. But yeah, that's perfect for that class. So, disclaimers, we're media recording. I said this to probably 80% of the room already, but if you have a deep philosophical hate of being behind a camera, then tell me. Wow, fat fingered that one. The other disclaimer, we don't normally give this disclaimer, but this is a really easy run with it and just make stupid decisions talk. So, brisk reminder, don't change your grades or something stupid. Don't take the tool, point it at GMU servers, and subsequently brag to people about how you pointed it at GMU servers and figured out how to read list server emails you weren't supposed to or something obnoxious. Just don't do it. It causes a bad reputation for the club. And we used to have a warning system about violating acceptable use policy where we were like, settle down the first time, which we're definitely not supposed to be doing, but whatever. That policy got thrown out the window because everybody kept using their warning. So if we find out somebody runs with a talk and does something illegal, we subsequently hand it over to the security office. So don't do it. Yes. Wait.
Specifically Nmap.
Nmap's legality is pretty fine. They actually have a whole page on their website about the legality of running Nmap against stuff without permission. Usually you're fine. People do it here all the time. What I would personally be worried about here is there's violating the law, violating the acceptable use policy, and then pissing off their IDS. If you piss off their intrusion detection system, you get booted out of the network, and you have to sort it out for like a week. That happened to Chris Sissing at some point. Literally like legal activity. It was fine activity. It was on TCTF, and that challenge has since been removed. But he literally like was not allowed to connect to Mason Wi-Fi for like a week. So it's like your injury is relative to what you do, but you just don't need to mess with it. It's stupid. There's also at least one IT security office staff who's also a member of the club. So there's just multiple dimensions in which you can get screwed. Anyway, competition's coming up. A lot of speakers, namely Paul, will do recent news and all that. I usually don't. Sometimes I'll do club events, and that's about the extent of it. Pico CTF. Pico CTF has historically been pretty okay for beginners. It starts tomorrow, I believe. It's an online cybersecurity competition. You're going to see the channel pop up in Slack under CTF Watch, which I think everybody gets added to by default. We also made the decision to just put everybody on one team because it's targeted at middle and high school. So if we win something, we don't win anything anyway. So we're just loading up one team, and whatever people solve is whatever people solves, right? So you don't have to worry about like talking to the right people or leaking out flags to other teams or any of the stuff that you have to worry about during selective invite-only competitions. If you are brand new and you have no idea what I'm talking about as far as channels and stuff, we use Slack, competitivecyber.club. There's a link on the literal homepage to join our Slack. Metropolis. Metropolis is, it's like 2 Saturdays from now or something. It's like October 5th or 6th or whatever that Saturday is. It is at UMD in person. UMD advertises beginner friendly. If you've ever done National Cyber League, I don't know why you would have, because we never have at least, but the platform is the same for Metropolis, and it includes networking. So there's like as in like professional networking, not as in like Cisco networking. So you break for lunch, you break for talks with recruiters, all that. They encourage you to bring resumes. Metropolis, same deal. There's a channel for it in Slack. I'll just drop them both the channels after this meeting. Join whatever channel you're into. Metropolis has kind of mostly been organized now, so I highly recommend, if you're interested in it, saying something so we can get you on lists for like carpooling and teams and all that, because otherwise you probably won't get put on a list. So people are pulling out of Metropolis and in all the time, so you'll still have a spot. We just need to know we have to put you somewhere. So we're going to talk about Metasploit and Nmap. There's something conceptual to be said about the kind of penetration testing, red teaming, blah, blah, blah that you do with Metasploit and Nmap. It generally comes in 4 cycles: recon, scanning, exploitation, post-exploitation. Recon being analyzing and surveilling your target. It's usually more of a thing in the professional world than the competition world, because in the professional world you have an actual scope, like this company, identify holes in this company, in this division, and here's what you're allowed to do, here's what you're not. In a competition, it's literally like, here's the IP address, something is wrong with this specific computer. So there's less recon to be done. Additionally, recon tends to be more done on internet-facing systems because there's just more out there for it. Scanning, stuff like Nmap, which we will go over more in a second. Exploitation and post-exploitation would largely in this talk be done through Metasploit, and we will go into that more. But the point is, there's a 4-thing cycle. You're actually going to see this exact slide again if you go to our web exploitation talk, and it's going to be a completely different narrative about what actually matters and what doesn't in web exploitation. What's Nmap? Nmap is a port scanner. I know we are a beginner-friendly club and no experience necessary, but raise your hand if you are familiar with the concept of an IP address and a port. And actually, better question, close your eyes and raise your hand if you are not familiar with that. I don't want to shame anybody, but that's an easier way for me to see. Cool. Nobody raised their hands. Ports generally correlate to services, as you probably know, SSH22, etc., etc. So it's good to know what kind of ports are running on whatever system you're targeting. That's largely where Nmap comes in handy. It includes some plugin scripts to do some extra fun. I personally am not a fan of them. Like if you are scanning for, let's say, file shares, you can use a plugin script to scan for the particular shares or something. They're usually service specific. Some of them in brute force, all that. It just doesn't feel like, the reason I don't use them is it doesn't feel like that's what Nmap's built for. Nmap's a good port scanner, Nmap's good for identifying services. Beyond that, people are just jerry-rigging scripts together to do things, and there's no reason to use Nmap for it. The reason I say it's an attack surface matter is what you're really trying to do in Nmap is you're trying to figure out what is exploitable. If you scan a host and it says this has caveats, but if you scan a host and it says it's down and every port is closed, that's a pretty secure host. You don't really have much to hit. We'll go into how you can scan in one way and it say that, and scan in another way and it not say that. But general logic is if a computer has all of its ports closed, you're going to have a hard time hitting it over the network. It's still possible, but it's kind of a pain in the ass. It's you resort to like social engineering or phishing or man-in-the-middle type stuff. You don't generally resort to just throwing exploits at services after that. Nmap is the GUI version. So here's the thing. We don't, in this club, I'm very against gatekeeping and being like, if you use this tool, you're doing it wrong, or you're not a real hacker if you don't use this tool. Nmap. I won't judge you if you use Nmap. Nmap's a pretty cool tool from a GUI perspective. Armitage, on the other hand, which we will talk about in a second, I have a deep personal bias against. Armitage, we will go over what Metasploit is, but Armitage is the GUI version of Metasploit. I have much more of a bigger problem with this, because a lot can break under the hood with Metasploit. So your GUI can break and you won't even know what's happening. So, also, like, look at that screenshot. It's straight out of a movie. Like, what are we doing here? So, you're scanning for ports, you're scanning for services. It depends on what you're providing it as far as flags and all that. There's about 1 million flags for it. If you're totally out of the command line, what I mean by flags is like -SV or -V tacked onto a command. That's one reason you might want to use Nmap, is if you truly know nothing about the command line, then you can just power up Nmap and drop downs and all that. I have found for these kinds of tools, the command line version works 600 times better than the GUI version, pretty much 100% of the time. The GUI version usually just wraps around the command line version, so that's guaranteed to break more than the command line version is guaranteed to break. What is Metasploit? Metasploit is described as an exploitation framework. If you truly have no idea what any of this means, the closest thing you could call it is a command line tool. It'd be a slight mischaracterization, but that probably makes more sense to people who don't program or anything than a framework. It involves a ton of largely community-sourced Ruby exploits. Everything's written in Ruby. Everything is kind of hooked up as modules in Metasploit. Both are open source projects, so you've got people seeing a vulnerability in the wild, going, oh, that looks cool, writing weaponized code about the exploit, and then sending it to the Metasploit project to be added to Metasploit. That's the general life cycle of how stuff ends up in Metasploit. It is, unlike, somebody's welcome to call me out on this, but I believe, unlike Nmap, it is, I know this is under a company. This is under Rapid7. Nmap, to my knowledge, is pretty much just the Nmap project, and it's more of an open source initiative. Both are open source, but this is company run. You can scan for those exploits. You largely send exploits to servers. It's less of a scanning tool. Armitage lets you scan a little more, but it's just running commands in the background, and I think usually the commands are run this exploit as a dry run, so you're still running the exploit, you're just getting none of it back. MSF console is how you actually launch it. If you have a Kali virtual machine, which we told everybody to do in our first meeting and a couple times on Slack, if you don't, I'll throw a link up after this talk. Kali has Metasploit and Nmap already installed. Command to hit Nmap is Nmap. Command to hit Metasploit is MSF console. The reason being, Metasploit is more than just MSF console technically. They have MSF Venom, which is for like payload generation. If you ever hear people sending shellcode to a server in the club, they're using either MSF Venom or they're just crazy smart. It can be used for taking existing payloads and making them the most common case scenario I've seen historically is taking existing payloads and making them more resistant to antivirus. That's one of the biggest use cases I've seen MSF Venom used for. But yeah, Armitage, it's the GUI version. Metasploit has a whole database and everything behind it. So when you launch Armitage, not only, I believe, can you reach it through Armitage command in Kali, I believe on the sidebar, there's a picture of what looks like somebody with like blue hair and like green goggles. That's for Armitage. It'll prompt you to like connect to a database and all kinds of options that you're just gonna click through. Reason number 600, I hate the GUI, is because like that's an arguably more advanced startup step than just running MSF console. MSF console will be like, hey, do you want a database, yes or no? And you just press yes, and it's like, you're loaded up. So Nmap general usage. Nmap works pretty great on its own. without flags, people use flags a ton. You can get like, I want to say Security Plus or something has a large, raise your hand if you've taken Security Plus. Did you see like Nmap commands on there or no?
There's a few.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like, I think CEH has some of it. There are certifications like looking at particular Nmap runs. It'll tell you if something's open, filtered, or closed. I should note the reason I'm doing GIFs in this presentation is because my laptop's on a dead network for later, so we're stuck with GIFs. It'll tell you if a service is open, filtered, or closed. Open and closed are pretty self-explanatory. The service is open, there's nothing sitting there on that port, closed. Filtered is like a firewall's interfering with it or something. I personally generally, unless I have to not, disregard filtered, at least at first, because it can be a variety of things, including your own setup. If something's messing up from your VM to your host, it'll say a lot of stuff is filtered. Just a couple scenarios can just give you a ton of filtered false positives. Primitive scans. So it'll service scan you. It'll tell you like this is FTP, this is Telnet, this is SSH. When I say primitive scans play less nice, this is one I'm not expecting to get everybody on. Raise your hand if you know what the three-way handshake is with SYN, ACK, or you know of it. Okay, so most. You can do a ping scan, send pings to it and see if it's up and all that. You can send SYN packets to figure out what ports are open. For those less familiar, if you send a SYN, in theory, you should get an ACK back, acknowledge. So you send a SYN to it, send an ACK back. That's the little stealthier option. Some play less nice with service scans because some are sleuthier and some are service scans. Generally, they have to actually access the port and grab data, particular data back. And if the way you're scanning isn't compatible with grabbing that data back, they won't service scan you. They'll just say 22 is open or whatever. You can also scan networks. If you're familiar with CIDR ranges, you can throw those in there. So if you see like -24, you can scan that. There's ping versus SYN versus whatever, like I said. This is an example of one scan type with a different flag for like pings, one for like stealth, run wrong, and then one run right, and you get results back. Not only do you get results back, it has a service flag in, so you'll see, I don't know why I made it this brief, but you see full service names in this, like 4.7.1, 4.5, that's extremely useful. In the last screenshot with default options, you notice you got the just FTP open 21, which compared to the other output format is significantly worse than SSH 4.5 Ubuntu is running on this port. The reason that matters is with Metasploit. With exploits, they're generally dependent on services. Go figure. You update, you get exploited less. You want to know the service version so you can figure out if it's vulnerable or not. Metasploit has a few commands. As a reminder, if you're sitting on your laptop, MSF console is the command you bring it up with. It won't be baked into basically anything other than Kali. So if you don't have Kali, you're going to need to install it. Not install Kali. You're going to need to install these tools, but preferably just get Kali like we've been telling everybody to. Search. Searches for stuff, go figure. You do search. You say you get OpenSSH back as the name of a service. You do search OpenSSH. It brings back a list of, I think I have a screenshot here, right here. So that's the search. It's kind of tiny, but search, it's a particular type of a particular type of FTP server, VSFTP. Ironically, the VS stands for very secure. Patching modules, tells you an exploit, tells you when it was disclosed, tells you the rank, which is actually awesome. So if you see a version, if you see a service and you see, you search like blah 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 4.5, and it's like anything under 6 is use this and it's excellent, you're in. Like that's excellent is like it's gonna work. You see a description of it, it's just straight up backdoor command execution. This is a bit of a spoiler alert. This is one of the ways you can get into one of the boxes in the lab we're gonna do. Fun fact about this exploit, it was introduced into the project by an insider, and they made it so, is anybody familiar with the VSFTP backdoor? So was it the username or the password that you had to tack onto?
I think it was the password. You just put like,
Put a smiley face.
Yeah, you put a smiley face.
You put a smiley face at the end of the password, and it would automatically start a backdoor root shell on the server. It got burned out pretty quickly. Like it's 2.3.4, 2.3.3 didn't have it, and then 2.3.5 didn't have it because they saw it and were like, holy shit. But yeah, so let me go back to command line. Use is what you use to pick your exploit. Your Metasploit has scanners baked in, all that. You say use, and then a particular kind of path Metasploit likes, which is the next slide. Exploit just runs whatever actual exploit you have set up. And sessions shows what existing like popped servers you have. And sets the payload, which we can talk about in a little bit. The receiving host, the host you're sending the exploit to, and a few other things depending on what exploit you're running. Say you're running an exploit against a file share server. It might say, I need to know the name of a file share to run this exploit. Like it might need a little context. You're gonna set that context through set. Metasploit pathing, the path kind of looks like this. So you've got the type, whether that's exploit or I think auxiliary is the common one, all that. You've got the platform, Unix, Windows, blah, blah, blah. The service, FTP, SSH, et cetera, and the actual name of the actual thing. So you would run use, exploit, Unix, FTP, VS, FTP, blah, blah, and it'll pick it. Show options, shows the actual options, and that was just a note about how auxiliary exists, as in scanners are baked into Metasploit. This is an example, like I kind of showed. Search, and then I see it, I like it, I do use, and then the name of it. I do show options. It says the only two options really are the target port. It's an FTP exploit, so it just picks 21 by default. And the target host. That's the IP address of the host, so you do set space our host space the IP address. And then you can do show options again, and it'll show it set and all that. Once it's all set, you run. Once it's all set, again, apologies for not being able to just run through it, but this has all of our VMs on it, and we can't attack over GMU's network. Go figure. So all the options are set. I missed the part here where I say set our host, blah, blah, blah. But all the options are set. You run exploit. In my case, I ran exploit-j. That throws it in the background. So it'll exploit it, and then if you need to bring it back up with sessions, you can. I'll show that now. Sessions, it says you have an active shell from this IP to this IP. Usually uses higher ports because that's what makes sense if you're connecting between two endpoints. You don't want to pick a service port, but you want to avoid picking a port below 1024 because those traditionally need to be bound by root. So if you're running an exploit that doesn't necessarily get you root, but it gets you onto the server, it won't be able to bind like 60 as your backdoor port. And then sessions-i2 for the ID of the actual session. This is a bit of a mouthful because the actual type of session was kind of bad, but it was a shell. So if you're familiar with Linux at all, I ran ls and it returned all this. I ran pwd, I typed in pwd, hit enter, and it said dash for that's your current working directory. You can run who am I, hit enter, say root, whatever it's running as. So that's how you connect with sessions. Your mileage may vary. That's what the YMMV is. You can get a shell. You can get Meterpreter, which is really fun, and it's what they like using as your post-exploitation thing. Some options might not be supported. Again, these are crowdsourced modules. So if some guy decides, I'm going to write it, but it's only going to let you write commands backwards, they're probably going to accept it because it's better than not having that module. So some modules might have terrible options. Most have okay options. A lot of times you might want a reverse shell, what's called a reverse shell. If you're unfamiliar, well, raise your hand if you know what in vague terms a NAT is. N-A-T. Okay, so basically the NAT, at Mason, we're all under the same couple public IP addresses, basically. If you plug in to the wall or whatever, it used to be different, but if you plug into the wall or whatever, or you connect to the Wi-Fi, you don't get your own public IP address. What you get, the way you get data back is through something called network address translation. The reason that's an issue from an attack perspective is you can't just say, like if I'm at Virginia Tech and I'm trying to attack Thomas, I can't just say, attack Thomas's IP address, port 21 for FTP, because you can't directly reach the port of his device and he doesn't have a public address or any of that. That poses an issue for backdoors, because you can't just say, connect to the backdoor port 2222 or whatever, because it's one of many hosts behind that public IP address. The way you get around that is you have the victim connect back to the attacker. And you might be thinking, with these kinds of attacks, does that mean you both can't be natted? Pretty much, unless you do some extra stuff. That's why a lot of times you'll hear about command and control servers. You like putting your stuff that it's connecting back to on a public address, otherwise you have to do some insane stuff. So, reverse TCP is like a method by which you can attack in Metasploit. So if you're ever having issues and you're trying to attack a natted target, you need to keep in mind that you might need a reverse shell. Meterpreter also likes you pivoting, as does Armitage. Armitage supports pivoting really well, actually. Pivoting, the general idea behind pivoting, I actually saw this play out, was find a printer exposed to the internet at a certain Indian university. You attack that printer, you pivot into the university. So you get into the printer and you go, great, the printer's internet facing, but the rest of the university's network isn't internet facing. But now you're in the printer, so you can send whatever you want through the printer. So you use the printer as what's called a pivot. Meterpreter plays nice with pivoting, as does Armitage. Then just commonly stolen artifacts. People like establishing what's called persistence. There are some mechanisms under, when I talked about the type, where it's like exploit or auxiliary or whatever, I think there's a whole type dedicated to once you're in, what kind of fun are you gonna have? I hate the community behind that, because it's like, they'll send like a million like post-exploitation modules in being like, nailed it, and then it's like, you realize that's not the groundbreaking part. Like the groundbreaking part is not like, I figured out how to open every JPEG on the laptop once you're in. It's like, popular ones, people like hiding in the registry, people hide in scheduled tasks, et cetera, to keep some sort of persistence in it. A more fun one is, if anybody's ever heard of Mimikatz, you're seeing it in the wild a lot. It dumps credentials, it dumps passwords, and it also tries to do some more fun internal stuff with Windows. If you're familiar with golden tickets and all that, it's kind of leading the world in that. The Metasploit version, there is a baked-in version of it called Kiwi in Metasploit. You just pick that in Metasploit, and it's going to run Mimikatz for you. Yeah, people like stealing user data, go figure. People like stealing passwords, because once you get booted off the box, if you have everybody's passwords, then they have a lot more work to do than if you're just booted off the box. Go figure. User enumeration, seeing what users are there, seeing what kind of configurations the server has. Is anybody in IT 353 right now? Good. Okay. Is anybody going to be taking IT 353? User enumeration, service configurations, and all that. That is an example of a world that won't respond to you just throwing random exploits against the server. That is an example of a world where you want to look at like the server configurations and all that. If you have a reasonable sysadmin who updates but just kind of missed something, you need to see how he configured everything, because maybe he has an up-to-date service, but it's set up wrong that lets somebody in. That's pretty much where we're at. So here's what we're gonna do. If you are, raise your hand if you do not have Kali or Metasploit plus Nmap. Okay, so it's gonna take a while, but go to gme.cc training, and then I'll make this bigger. Categorize things to starting out. If you do, you're going to connect to, does everybody see the Wi-Fi network CC members only?